Before we begin, if you have ever considered yourself a deeply feeling, spiritually aware, consciously evolving person, and yet somehow, repeatedly, you find yourself in relationships that drain you, confuse you, or quietly diminish you, if you've ever looked at your own relationship history and thought, how does this keep happening to me? This video was made for you. And if Empire of the Mind is the channel that finally asks the questions no one else is willing to ask, subscribe right now. Hit that bell. Turn on all notifications. Because what we are about to explore is going to challenge everything you thought your spiritual awareness was protecting you from. Let's go. There is a particular kind of person who does the work. They read the books. They sit in meditation. They journal. They reflect, they pray, they seek, they go to therapy, they attend the retreats, they study the philosophies. They are committed, genuinely committed, to becoming more conscious, more compassionate, more awake to themselves and to the world around them. And yet, their relationships remain a battlefield, or a graveyard, or both. They fall, again and again, for people who cannot meet them where they are. They give extraordinary depth to partners who offer surfaces in return. They attract chaos when they have worked so hard to cultivate peace. They find themselves the emotional caretaker, the rescuer, the one who holds everything together until they are holding nothing but exhaustion and the faint, bewildering question, why me? Of all people, why me? Carl Jung would not be surprised. In fact, he would say the answer is hidden inside the very thing you are most proud of, your spiritual awareness itself. And understanding why is going to require us to go somewhere uncomfortable. Because the uncomfortable places, as Jung always insisted, are the only places where anything real is ever found. Let's begin at the foundation. Jung's entire life's work was built around one central conviction, that the human psyche is not simply what we are aware of. The psyche is vast. It is largely unconscious, and the parts of it we refuse to see do not disappear into harmless silence. They shape our lives from the shadows, directing our choices, our attractions, our compulsions, with an authority that our conscious intentions rarely have the power to override. He called this unconscious reservoir the shadow, the totality of everything we have rejected, repressed, or refused to integrate about ourselves. And here is the paradox that sits at the very heart of this conversation. The more consciously spiritual a person becomes, the larger and denser their shadow tends to be. Let that land for a moment, because it sounds counterintuitive. Shouldn't the person doing the most inner work have the least shadow? Shouldn't awareness shrink the darkness? Not necessarily, and here is why. Spiritual development, in many of its most common expressions, is organized around an ideal, an image of what a conscious, evolved, loving human being looks like: peaceful, forgiving, compassionate, non-reactive, above pettiness, above anger, above the messy, inconvenient hungers of ordinary human life. And when you build your identity, your persona, in Jung's language around that ideal, everything that contradicts it gets pushed into the shadow. Your rage, your selfishness, your desire for power, your capacity for cruelty, your envy, your unmet needs, your hunger to be chosen, to be first, to matter in ways that have nothing to do with service or selflessness. None of those things goes away. They go underground, they accumulate, they grow in the dark. And then, because the psyche is always seeking wholeness, always moving toward integration, whether we consciously choose it or not, they find a way to the surface. And very often, they find that way through the people we are attracted to. Jung called this mechanism projection, and it is the engine beneath almost every pattern of difficult attraction that spiritually oriented people experience. Here is how it works. when you have repressed a quality so thoroughly that you no longer recognize it as your own, your psyche begins to perceive it exclusively in the external world. You don't see your own rage, but you are magnetically drawn to rageful people. You don't acknowledge your own hunger for chaos, but you find yourself repeatedly in chaotic situations that somehow feel familiar, even comfortable. You don't claim your own shadow of control and manipulation, but you keep choosing partners who are controlling and manipulative. This is not a coincidence. This is not bad luck. This is the unconscious doing exactly what Jung said it does, seeking wholeness by bringing you face to face with the parts of yourself you have refused to own. The difficult person in your life is not simply a difficult person. They are, psychologically speaking, a living mirror. They are showing you something. And the intensity of your reaction to them, the way they get under your skin, the way they activate something in you that feels ancient and overwhelming, that intensity is a map. It is pointing directly at the unintegrated shadow. Jung said it plainly: everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. And for spiritually developed people, whose shadows are often particularly rich and particularly denied, the people they attract tend to be particularly intense mirrors. Now let's bring in another layer, the anima and the animus. Jung understood that within every human psyche lives a contrasexual inner figure. In men, the anima, the inner feminine, carrying feeling, depth, mystery, relatedness. In women, the animus, the inner masculine, carrying direction, authority, the power of one's own convictions. These inner figures are not abstract concepts. They are living psychological forces. They carry enormous energy. And when they are not consciously integrated, when a man has not genuinely met his own inner feminine, when a woman has not genuinely claimed her own inner authority, the psyche projects these figures outward. It looks for them in the world, in a partner, in a teacher, in a rescuer. And for spiritual people, this projection tends to take on a sacred quality. The beloved doesn't just feel like an attractive person. They feel like a soul connection, like destiny, like the universe conspiring to bring two people together, like God speaking through chemistry. Sometimes that is real. Sometimes the sacred quality of an encounter is genuine, and the meeting is truly significant. But sometimes, and Jung was unflinching about this, what we are calling destiny is projection. What we are calling a soul connection is an encounter with our own unlived interior, wearing another person's face. And the tragedy of that encounter is that no human being can sustain the weight of carrying your inner god or goddess indefinitely. They will eventually disappoint you. They will eventually reveal themselves as human, flawed, limited, inconsistent, occasionally selfish. And when they do, what follows is not just ordinary disappointment. It is the collapse of an archetype. It feels like devastation. It feels like the bottom is dropping out of the universe. Because in a psychological sense, it is. The spiritual person who has not integrated their own anima or animus will repeat this cycle. They will move from sacred connection to devastating collapse, from devotion to disillusionment, from "this is the one" to "how could I have been so wrong?" And the cycle will continue until they do the one thing that is harder than finding the perfect partner, until they find themselves. There is a third dynamic that Jung identified, and it may be the most painful one to hear, especially if you are someone who values compassion, who prides themselves on their capacity to love unconditionally, who genuinely wants to help the people around them heal. Jung observed that spiritually and psychologically aware people are often unconsciously organized around a specific archetypal role, the wounded healer. The wounded healer is a figure as old as mythology. Chiron, in Greek tradition, the centaur who could heal all others but could not heal his own immortal wound. The shaman who descends into illness and darkness and returns with medicine for the tribe. the therapist who chose their profession because they first needed to understand their own pain. There is nothing wrong with the wounded healer archetype. It carries genuine gifts. The person who has suffered and integrated that suffering has access to a quality of empathy, of presence, of understanding that cannot be manufactured. But in its shadow expression, and this is where it becomes a pattern of destructive attraction, the wounded healer unconsciously requires a wounded person to heal. Their sense of purpose, their identity, and their experience of love itself become organized around the presence of someone who needs them. They are not attracted to availability. They are attracted to potential. They do not fall for the person who is already whole. They fall for the person who, with enough love, enough patience, enough devotion, could be whole. And in that falling, they place themselves in a relationship that is structured from the very beginning around an imbalance, around their giving and the other's receiving, around their patience and the other's chaos, around their light and the other's darkness. And they call it love. And sometimes it genuinely is love. But it is also, and Jung would insist on this, a way of avoiding the terrifying vulnerability of being loved by an equal, a way of staying in the position of the one who gives, because receiving requires a kind of openness, a kind of exposure that feels unbearable to a psyche organized around being needed. The difficult relationship, in this light, is not simply something that happens to the spiritual person. It is something the spiritual person, from the very depths of their unconscious, selects. Because it is familiar, because it confirms a story, because it allows the wounded healer to remain forever in the role they know best and avoid the role that terrifies them most, being simply, quietly, unspectacularly loved. So, what is the way out? What did Jung point toward? He pointed toward individuation, always, relentlessly. The ongoing, humble, courageous work of integrating the shadow of claiming your own rage, your own selfishness, your own hunger, your own wounds, rather than finding them in the people you love. The work of withdrawing your projections, of recognizing when you are reacting not to who someone actually is, but to what your own unconscious has placed upon them. He pointed toward the integration of the Anima and Animus, toward becoming the source of the inner wholeness you have been seeking in another person. Not so that you stop wanting a partnership, but so that when you enter a partnership, you bring a whole person and you can receive one. And he pointed toward an honest reckoning with the shadow of spiritual identity itself, with the ways that spiritual development can become another persona, another mask, more beautiful and more subtle than the ones it replaced, but still a mask. Still, a way of organizing the self around an ideal rather than a reality. Still, a way of making the shadow denser by insisting on the light. Jung wrote that wholeness is not about being good. It is about being real. And real people are complicated. They contain multitudes. They are capable of both extraordinary love and profound selfishness. They carry wounds and they carry gifts, and they are not always sure which is which. The relationship that is truly worthy of a spiritually developing person is not a relationship with someone who has no shadow. It is a relationship with someone willing to look at their own. Not a relationship without conflict, but a relationship where conflict becomes a doorway rather than a verdict. Not a relationship without darkness, but a relationship where two people are committed, together, to bringing what is unconscious into the light. That is not a perfect relationship. It is a real one. And real, Jung would tell you, is the only kind that leads anywhere worth going. If this reached something in you, if it named a pattern you've been living in but couldn't see clearly, then you understand exactly why Empire of the Mind exists. Subscribe to this channel. Join a community of people who are done explaining away their patterns and ready to actually understand them. Every video we create is a torch, something to carry into the parts of yourself that have been living in the dark. Subscribe, Share this with someone you love who keeps asking the same question about their relationships and deserves a real answer. Because the relationships we attract are not random, they are not fate, they are not punishment. They are invitations. Invitations to finally go inward and meet the self that has been waiting with extraordinary patience for you to arrive. The empire we are building is not built on perfect love stories. It is built on the courage to become someone capable of being a real one. Subscribe, and we'll see you inside.